Hi again, I'm Alister Benn, and this is Vision and Light. This week I'm speaking to another American landscape photographer, TJ Thorne. Now, it must have been about a month ago now that we actually recorded this, and TJ and I have become incredibly good friends. This conversation that you're about to listen to was the first time I'd actually spoken with TJ, and subsequently we text each other and speak on the phone quite regularly because we've found that we share an incredibly similar approach to not just landscape photography but also life in general. This is one of the great perks of this job is getting to meet and to be introduced to people like TJ. Now, TJ, I think, is a classic example of a photographer whose work is very quiet, his voice is very quiet, and he doesn't like to put himself forward and to promote himself particularly. But that type of work gets kind of lost in the noise of social media to a certain extent. I want to mention his new ebook, which is out now. It came out last week. And I can thoroughly recommend you go and buy this book. The link is beneath this video. I had a copy of it before it came out, and it is an incredibly insightful and thoughtful approach to how to make photographs in the middle of the day. It's something I've vlogged about myself on this channel, and TJ does an incredible job illustrated with beautiful photographs. And at less than $20, it's an absolute must buy. So please get yourself over to TJ's website and buy a copy of that. He really needs the support to help him move his business forward and to get his message for the quiet landscape out there to a broader audience. So without any more further ado, here is my conversation with the wonderful TJ Thorne. So, a warm welcome to TJ Thorne. Very much a pleasure to finally talk with you face to face. So we've been hammering out some back and forth by email and Facebook and so forth, but it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise, I've really enjoyed what you've been doing with this, and I'm excited to be a part of it, honored to be a part of it. It's I think it's going to be a pretty good chat. So looking forward to it.
That's it, pre-disastered. So, right, I've been having a good look through your website, and it's, as I was saying to you before we kind of started the conversation, up until about 6 months ago, I wasn't terribly aware so much of your work, purely because I was living in a bubble and just so busy with my own workshops and so forth that I didn't have a lot of time to kind of immerse in other people's work. But what I'm seeing is that looking back on your prints or your galleries, which are subdivided by year, that 2014 was the year that you first had portfolio print sales. Was that when you kind of started up, or how long had you been shooting prior to that?
2014, I just think, is the earliest work that I'm willing to show.
Okay.
I've been photographing for a decent amount of time. I started more with just playing around with the camera and doing I've talked about this a lot recently, so it feels like I'm saying it again, but I know that you haven't heard this. So I started just by I needed a camera for taking photos of food because I was in culinary school. That was my initial career out of high school. So I was an apprentice with the American Culinary Federation, and they needed, I worked a full-time 40-hour-a-week job where I was an apprentice at a country club, and then I also went to school full-time, and it was a 3-year apprenticeship. So they wanted photos of the food that you were making at your job for the apprenticeship program. And I didn't have a camera, so I went to Walmart and spent $200 on a camera, and I thought I was dropping some serious money. I'm like, yeah, fancy camera, right? And I kind of just started out with that and going to punk rock shows. I was into skateboarding, snowboarding, so I would take my camera with me and do those things. And it wasn't an expressive thing for me at the time. I just knew that I really enjoyed the process of photography and like distilling everything down into this little frame. And I guess it all kind of started there. And I really enjoyed the process of it. I moved to Oregon in 2001.
Okay.
9/11 happened. I remember I was still sitting in an empty apartment, and I had to go to a bar and kind of watch the TV and see what was going on.
Wow.
And yeah, I kept falling more and more in love with photography. And then in 2012, I was really into hiking. And this is like I discovered when I realized that there was a nature photography and landscape photography genre very recently, because I was kind of going back and trying to find out when this all started and why. And I remember, I was really into hiking. That was my main interaction with nature, and I kind of just started taking my camera along with me, and I posted my photos on a hiking forum because I didn't know about 500px or any of these things. Instagram wasn't a thing back then, so I was part of this hiking forum, and I was posting my photos on there, asking questions. They had a photography section to it, so I was asking questions about photography, and I even found a thread where I was asking about processing in Photoshop, and I'm like, I feel weird processing my photos, and kind of just going through that whole process on this hiking forum. And then I remember stumbling across 500px, and this is back in early 2012. So I found out about 500px, and I posted about that on the hiking forum. And I posted about 500px on the hiking forum in like November of 2012. And that was when I realized that there's a landscape photography genre and community, and there's actually something that I can grab a hold of and kind of like just grab the reins and go off into the sunset. So the next time that I went out, I actually had a little bit more intent behind my photography, and winter solstice of 2012 was when I considered that I created my first landscape photography photo with intent behind it.
Okay.
And then up until then, it was just kind of like finding my way and going full blast.
Okay, that's interesting because how we all get into this is it's a curious path for some of us. It's there's no one way, I think. But what's common in a lot of the people who I'm talking to, it's a love for nature. It's that just passion for being out in the wilderness and so forth. Now, something that comes across an awful lot in your work and your writing is a much deeper meditative and psychological benefit from being in nature. So it seems that you mentioned the word meditation. Do you engage in a formal meditative practice, or is photography your meditation?
Photography is the meditation. And actually, when you said that, I got goosebumps, and I still have them, about, just being able to see that in my photos, because, that is important to me. The whole reason that I go to nature is to escape. And, and this is also something that I say a lot, because this is very important. But this is the basis of my photography, is that when I go to nature, I am going there to escape the demons and the stress and the bills and Facebook and traffic and people and shopping and, all the things that life has become. That doesn't matter in nature. In nature, it's just me in the environment. It's what I like to call the nuts and bolts of existence. There's nothing else that matters at that time aside from my existence and interacting with the landscape. And I don't hide the fact that, I've battled alcoholism, and nature is what helped me. It kept me alive. In 2010 is when I stopped drinking, and I haven't had a drink since. And thank you. When I was feeling like I was in danger, I went hiking. I knew that when I was out in nature hiking, that I was safe. I wasn't filling my thoughts or my mind with those bad thoughts. I was more filling my heart and trying to find gratitude that I was there at that time, sober and interacting, and yes, it was hard. I'm being tugged at both ends. But I knew that if I grounded myself in that moment, in that time, and I wasn't somewhere where I was at risk, that I was safe. So I credit nature and photography with saving my life in like the deepest way possible. So, and I still carry that with me today. When I go to nature, it's to just, you know what, it's to be myself. And I don't actively participate in nature. I'm not sitting there like, you know, eyes closed sometimes, you know, but it's more just to listen and feel. It's not like I guess the best way you put it is that active meditation. It's just when I'm looking through my viewfinder, I'm interacting with that subject on a very emotional and visceral level that I can't get if I'm just staring at it. I have to be lost in my viewfinder, interacting with that subject one-on-one. So, you know, it's not the photo that I'm after. It's just the love of being able to use a camera to interact with that element.
We're so on the same page, man.
So that's the basis of my photography, is just interacting with something that lightens my soul. And that is, in a nutshell, that's it.
That is so inspiring to hear. Not just your the fact that you've stayed sober for a decade, which is massively, you know, huge congratulations, because it's such a battle. I grew up on the west coast of Scotland with an alcoholic father, and it's in your life, and it's something that we have to watch all the time. And I've had my own battles with alcohol and depression and anxiety. And we talked a lot with Guy Tal about this. And I was talking with Sarah Marino about this the other day. She was talking the same thing about having lots of anxiety and lots of fear and an overactive mind. And when we're in nature, it's a way for us to zone everything else out and engage that busy mind or that addictive mind. So you're kind of fortunate that you'd been able to make a living out of this this miraculous engagement with the world around you. So, do you feel there's any barriers between yourself and your engagement because you're having to make a business out of it, or have you managed to balance that scale?
I do. I mean, I don't know. There are, you know, obviously there are things about the business side of it that impact my relationship with nature, whether it's not going out on this day because I have to get this ebook or this video done, or, you know, I have this engagement, or, you know, hey, I'd really love to be interacting with this landscape, but I'm here with a workshop and I can't get into that zone. I have to be focusing on the clients. But I feel strongly, and this could be completely misguided, but I feel strongly that if I follow my heart and produce work that I'm happy with and that has meaning to me, that eventually the money or the success, or however you want to quantify success, will come. So, you know, I do feel like I've been creating personally meaningful images, and they're not externally inspired. I mean, you know, obviously I take photos of things that people have photographed before. You know, we've said back and forth that, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and, you know, there might not be a lot of novelty in what I'm doing, but everything that I'm interacting with is because it comes from in here. It's not like, oh, you know, I saw Alister take a photo of this and that's pretty cool, so I'm going to try it. It's no, I just go out, and when something captures my heart or my mind, I decide that I'm going to spend a little bit of time with it, looking through my viewfinder and developing a personal relationship with that moment in time. And, you know, I kind of thought about recently that, you know, it can be a very anonymous tree in one specific spot, you know, and if I interact with that and build that relationship with it, when I go back to that spot, I recognize that tree. You know, that tree and I have a relationship, and, you know, I think about all the times that we drive, you know, how many trees have we walked past or driven past in our whole entire lives? You know, like hundreds of thousands, millions, you know, I don't even know, but we have specific trees or subjects that we remember. And why do we remember them? It's because we have a relationship with them. They call to us for some reason, and we engage with that call, and we develop that relationship with it. And so like every time, it might be a certain tree that we drive past on our way to the grocery store, we look at that tree and we remember that tree, and we'll remember that tree for the rest of our lives.
Right.
So I don't know where I was going with this answer, but because the original question was, do I find the barriers, right?
Yeah, in terms, it is the fact that you have to, because I mean, something you said was success. How do we measure success? And I think we measure our fiscal viability by making a living. But in terms of measuring success, I measure success based on the stuff you measure success with, which is essentially your heart and the resonance you have with the world around you, and how true to yourself you are, rather than having to bow to the corporate demands of somebody. I think one of the big advantages we have as self-employed people is we can make our own successes or failures, and it's down to us. But I think realistically, where we've kind of drifted into here is this: what photographs are to you. And the best kind of definition I've come up with recently, which I'd kind of like to put to you because I value your opinion, is that the photographs I'm making these days are the ones I can look back on when I'm nearly dead and say, when I made that, I was truly alive.
Yes.
That was a focused moment where I was so at one with the environment and nature and myself that it's a representation of a moment in life where I was truly alive.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that in your work.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I have it in like my statement about my work, that each image that I make is a moment in time where I was living. I was nothing, like I said, nothing else, and this gets back to that meditative state, nothing else in the world exists at that time except for me and the subject. And I think that's kind of where I started drifting into this side of it, is because, I make it a point to interact with nature in that way and only show photos that I am connected to. There might be a moment in time that I'm exploring this subject, and that's how I think about photography, is exploring. I don't think about it as photographing. I think about it as me using the camera to explore a certain subject. So there might be, all these different moments in time or plays of light or subjects that I'm exploring through my camera, and that relationship is always going to be there, and that's what I'm after. Sometimes I might get a photo out of the experience, a visually pleasing photo that I think can make it into my portfolio. And if I don't, I'm still left with that relationship, and I don't throw away those photos. They're still, I can still go through them in my library and see them and remember and feel, but they're not working photographically for me, which is completely fine. But the ones that do work for me are the ones where I'm really connected to, and I put a lot of heart and soul into the processing of them, probably more than I would care to admit, but I put a lot of attention into my photos,
right,
to make sure that they are representative of my experience engaging with that. There is, I've talked to some friends about my level of perfectionism when it comes to my photos, and how I spend times, like harping on whether or not this blue needs to be shifted 2 or 3 degrees of hue,
right,
or whether or not I need an extra 2 points of saturation or something. It comes down to those very minuscule amounts, and I'm constantly reviewing my portfolio. And if there's anything in my portfolio that's bothering me about a photo, I either go back and fix it, or it eventually gets deleted from my portfolio. Because, and this is just a recent realization that I had, is that when I'm in nature and I'm experiencing that moment, it's perfect to me. Like it's perfect. And that's how I want my photos to feel. I don't want to look back at a photo of a moment that I had where I was really in tune with what was going on with me, and recognize something about the photo that bothers me or is imperfect in my mind. So that's why I spend so much time on my photos, going through them. And yeah, I really want to create photos from here and not from any external reasons to like drum up a workshop, or like, oh, you know what, I haven't released the blazing sunrise and sunset from the Oregon coast recently, and I really need to fill this class workshop spot. So maybe I'll, granted, I don't get blazing sunrises and sunsets. That's just my luck. But I don't put a focus on that either. I'm more interested in that moment in time that I'm interacting with, that where every decision in my life, big and small, has led me to that moment, and I want to interact with that moment. It's like kind of like almost a planned serendipity. Like it's all by chance, but every decision in my life, subconsciously or without intent, has led me to that moment.
Right.
So and I want to interact with that in a way that's important, because to me that moment is existing just for me.
The thing with talking with you is that there's so many things that you're saying that are just in my head every day. It's just how I live my life. It seems very, very similar. So this conversation could go in any number of directions, because I could pick up on, half a dozen things you've just said in the last 2 or 3 minutes. Something I think I'm very enthused by and very encouraged by is that either through social media killing some aspects of landscape photography and people's willingness to be individuals because of striving to be popular. If we photograph the same as everybody else and we do it kind of well, then it's easier, I guess, to be popular. But at the same time, do you think that what it's doing is putting more of a focus on the photograph than the event? Or do you think there's the thing what I guess I was going to say is, do you think I seem to feel now encouraged that there's a core of people out there who most of us know, I think you and I know who they are, that are teaching photography in a way that's far more about the relationship and the engagement and the therapeutic benefits of landscape photography. And yes, the photograph is important as a communicative, articulate representation of that, but it's experience and process before the image.
Yeah, this has been something I've pondered. There was a landscape photography boom, right? Maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but when like this whole Instagram thing, and like so many people started getting into nature and landscape photography, which is great. But it seemed like the focus was always outdoing the last person's photo from a particular place, based on the conditions or the light that they got, not necessarily the way that they were interacting with it. So it's like, oh, I'm going to go shoot this waterfall, the same comp that everybody else shot, but it has snow, so, there was a time where that was what landscape photography kind of like seemed to be focused around, was going to all the new ends of the earth to capture what nobody else photographed before. And then once all those ends of the earth were covered, going to those ends of the earth to capture what everybody else had photographed, but with different conditions.
Right.
And I feel like there was such a rush to do all those things. And now those spots are kind of getting worn out. Like all those popular places, like even the people that may have started doing that are starting to see those same photos of those same places and the same conditions over and over and over again. And it's either pushing them to want something more from their photography because they're not being fulfilled. I mean, this is just a guess. I don't know everybody's motivations.
No.
But it seems that there is even a saturation for those people. So either people are trying to find deeper meaning in their photography and transitioning to smaller scenes, which are harder to do, right? Because you have to interact with the landscape in a different way, in a way that might not be apparent or in practice for a lot of people, because so many people are focused on everything as a whole coming in, but rarely do we stop and slow down to take in the details and interact with them. But more and more, I'm finding that there is a focus on the expressive and emotional side of photography, as evidenced by your channel, as evidenced by, Adam Gibbs winning, International Landscape Photographer of the Year, and just kind of like a more of a focus on these smaller scenes and interaction with landscape in different ways. So it's exciting to, have already been doing that. And, maybe that's an opportunity to kind of align my business and the way that I do photography in a way that will help me get that success in the financial quantitative way.
Quantitative.
When I can't say a word properly, I just screw it up really badly to hide it.
Okay, that works. I agree 100%. I think that the intimate small scenes it's our way of being unique, because you're basically photographing something that a bunch of people might never have noticed before. And for me, it's just a far more personal experience. I mean, this is a recurring theme on Vision and Light as I'm talking to people from all over the world, and we all know these famous places, and a lot of them are getting destroyed. And I know we're all engaged in the nature first principles and, running things in a responsible manner. So realistically then, the real value, it seems, for you in photography is it's a way to switch off a kind of overactive mind and zone in on something else that actually seems to not just calm but inspire and motivate and bring out your creativity. So it's a curious relationship, really. How much of your angst do you think comes through in your work, and do you see a psychological layer to your work beyond the aesthetic?
I do, I kind of, where we are with the world right now, my heart almost breaks every day, just kind of seeing what's going on and the way people treat each other. And, I think about my son, and, I think about the life that I had growing up. And I know not everything was great back in the, the 80s and 90s, but, I had a good life full of many good things and not a lot of worries and things. And maybe that was, maybe I just wasn't aware of how cruel the world could be back then. But, I think it's on big display right now, and I internalize that a lot. So,
okay,
I in photography, is the complete opposite of that for me. When I'm out in nature, I'm finding the reasons to be grateful, and I'm finding the solace that my heart needs that I can't get sitting in front of a computer or being in the city, or not doing anything that is not interacting with nature. So it's kind of like the other side of the scale, like all that stuff kind of weighs me down on that side, and I need to fill the other pot with the good things to kind of balance everything out, because we do need, we need that sorrow, and we need that hurt, but we have to make sure that we're balancing it out with the things that are important, and maybe tipping them a little bit heavier in that side. But I don't want to not feel and not be sad and not be hurt, because then I don't have a reason to be grateful for the things that on the other side, So if there is any emotion that comes through my photos, it would be from that approach. And I often lament the fact that I can't interact with my imagery in an objective way. Everything's subjective. I miss out on that initial emotional reaction that you might get to my finished photo. You've seen my photo as I want to present it, and it gives you this initial emotional reaction, maybe, hopefully, and I miss out on that. I do get the side of photography where I am getting to experience the moment and working on a photo and interacting with it in that way. but there is a part of me that is like sad that I kind of miss out on the finished product emotional response.
Right.
So
Yeah, I get that.
I can't speak for how that might come through to different people, but I know that my whole process is rooted in that gratitude and that wonder and just like experiencing that moment. So I
Yeah.
think that answers the question.
Yes, that's a good answer, and I think the fact that you brought in the subjective objective angle was really useful, because I think this is part of what I'm trying to achieve is an understanding of this objective emotional reaction to the work. So it's almost as if there's a way to detach from ourselves to a certain extent and allow that objectivity by understanding the mechanisms of what generates an emotional reaction. Because I would say generally the majority of the work of yours that I've been looking at is quite joyful. You know, it seems that it's a celebration of life in all its forms. And I think the color palette that you choose is essentially quite joyful. So I see an awful lot of optimism in your work, and this could just be I'm curious as to how much of that is It sounds like a lot of your processing is very conscious. You know, there's a huge amount of consciousness, and I'm curious as to whether your consciousness is aesthetically driven or emotionally driven or technically driven.
Emotionally first, aesthetically second, technically third.
Okay.
I kind of forgot your question.
Pardon me?
I said I kind of forgot the question.
Sorry, you broke up slightly there.
Oh, I forgot the question.
Right. Well, it's basically if you're quite a technical processor in terms of there's high levels of precision and thought going into the processing. My question was really how much of that precision is being driven by emotions or the aesthetic, or is it more sort of that hue needs to be that so that it balances with that, you know, in a complementary color palette or something like that, or an analogous color palette? Is it moving hues because of technical reasons or aesthetic reasons or emotional reasons?
Okay, so the whole basis of me working on a photo is emotional. You know, I don't, when I'm looking through my potential folder, I sometimes like I'll scroll past an image that just keeps calling to me to like, hey, process me, process me, process me, you know, and I'll ignore it to the point where I get to where I can't, and I'm like, you know what, I do want to work on this photo. Like I'm currently working on a photo of clouds that I took 3 years ago, and every time that I scrolled past it in my potential folder, I was like, I remember that. You know, that was a really good time, but it just wasn't the right time for me to process it. So starting a photo is very emotional.
Right.
And I do have a lot of care about the technical perfection of things. And that comes back to wanting nothing in my photos to really bug me about, you know, whether this part's out of focus or soft or things like that. There's that side. But when it comes down to actually processing and doing the work on the photo, you know, generally the immediate direction I take it is based on emotion. Like I want it to be joyful or brighter or, you know, calming and simple and not dramatic and overwhelming. But when I'm actually doing the work, it comes down to aesthetics and making sure, you know, I don't look up, I don't plug my image into a color wheel, and I don't think a lot about, you know, color harmony and shapes and things. And then, and like, that's kind of, you know, in watching your videos, it makes me wonder if maybe that's something that I need to improve on, because when I'm looking at an image, I'm not seeing a circle and a V or like things like different shapes that I need to fit together. And I certainly don't see that when I'm taking the photo. You know, I interact with the subject in a very, very literal way. And I feel like if I start coming at it from a way where I'm thinking about composition and like, okay, so I have this shape up here, which means I should have this shape down here, and like all that. Like it takes me out of that literal
Totally.
interaction. So, I don't, I, yeah, I'm going about aesthetics and not technicality at all, or like, there's no theory or process behind what I do and why I do it. I just want it to be a photo that I'm happy with.
Okay, so the reason I kind of pursued that is because, I think what I was trying to clarify in my own mind is our ability to be objective about our own work. Because and your answer brings me quite a lot of joy again, because it seems to me that your emotional relationship with the landscape, and then subsequently the raw file, which I call sketches, sketches of moments, I suppose, because I have very little consciousness when involved in my work. When I'm in the landscape, I do everything by feel. I don't think about composition at all, because that's the only way I can really capture the subconscious or the unconscious. As soon as you consciously start thinking that needs to be there, so it juxtaposes with that there, and some kind of technical distillation of the scene, I think you lose your emotional relationship with it. So I'm totally on board with that. And so the thing that you kind of said that made me feel as if you do have objectivity is this emotional resonance that you have with the data. So it's basically saying to you, process me. And then it's really just your how technically adept you are with the processing that's allowing the aesthetic to become a representation of that emotional resonance. So I think ultimately what you're really getting is that the image is turning out the way you want it to look, and therefore you've objectively kind of summarized your emotional relationship with it.
Yeah, I can see that. But it kind of feels like I sometimes, like I said, I wonder if maybe having a little bit more consciousness around all those things could change my imagery for the better. Like, when I'm interacting in that some subconscious way, or, not having a lot of thought behind things and relying on feel, I tend to frame things in a very particular way. Like I have a lot of really centered compositions or isolated subjects in the middle of the frame, because like that is what I'm focusing on. So that is what I feel like I should do. But then when, and it's not comparing myself to others, but when I do view others' work, there is a complexity to some of the compositions that I wish that I could see. But the only way that I can really see that is by thinking about it. So part of me wants to work on that, the complexity of my subconscious interaction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
because
does.
it's just, it's just something that I notice, and it also kind of frustrates me, when I interact with the subject, and when I'm done with it, I'm like, all right, there we go again, another centered subject or another diagonal line. That's kind of just what I'm on to. But how do you improve upon that and become a more complex person without trying to be a complex person in a very conscious way, I guess. We keep saying that word. So there's a balance that I'm going to have to draw, and it's just a personal thing. Nobody's ever been like, can come to me and be like, you center a lot of your compositions, or you shoot a lot of diagonal lines. Nobody's ever said that to me, but it's something that I've noticed, and something that just, when I think about something that I might want to improve, that's one of them.
I think that this is the downside of being a perfectionist. I know that you're very good friends with Ted and Alex, and the three of you all seem to resonate in a very similar way with regards to perfection. I've spoken with Alex. I haven't spoken with Ted, but we've had email correspondence and stuff over the years. And I think these levels of precision breed demons to a certain extent. And if it's any consolation to you, I'm never satisfied either. Because when I was talking with Alex a couple of weeks ago, he said he gets imposter syndrome where he doesn't feel that he belongs in the upper echelons of contemporary landscape photography because of various things, like he doesn't feel there's enough emotional resonance in his own work or whatever. And I think that's just the way life is that we're always going to compare ourselves to others and just think, well, maybe I'm a bit shallow. I get it all the time because my strength, I think, is my lack of thought. It's I do have a very, very busy mind, but when I'm processing or when I'm in the field, I switch off my consciousness almost completely. And the only time I ever articulate anything is when I'm teaching, because that's when you have to articulate. So there's no easy answer to what you asked, but I think ultimately, maybe you are just a centered composition type of guy.
maybe. Yeah, the whole articulation thing is challenging as a workshop leader. I remember as I was kind of discovering a lot more about my creativity and who I was as a photographer and stuff like that, I was doing workshops, and they were based in getting people to these popular waterfalls. And of course, they'd all want the composition. I remember there's Ellowa Falls in the Columbia River Gorge. And, Mark had made famous a composition where he had the waterfall reflecting in a puddle.
Yep.
And there's a very, I know how to take that shot, and it's very formulaic. There's a process, it's like, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up our camera right here, and we have to be this high, because if we go too high, then the reflection's off. If we go too low, then, and all these different things. So, and after doing this year after year after year, and people are like, oh, I want the Mark shot. I want the Mark shot. I want the Mark shot. I'm just like, this isn't what I want to be teaching.
No.
Like I'm taking this, photography is so much more than just, going to a place and collecting a trophy or whatever. And I understand that side of it. I don't judge people for wanting to do that, or, not necessarily maybe having the time to work on their creative side to the point where they are breaking out of that. It's just not for me. And I don't want to teach that, so having to articulate what I do, why I do it, and how I do it has been very hard for me. And, I just did the Out of Chicago online conference, and I've been trying to get into that side of things for a while now. I emailed Chris a while ago, and I didn't hear back. I know he's a busy guy. So then I started, out of Yosemite, I worked Alex and I worked Sarah, my connections, to try to get in on that. And he was happy to have me, which was great. But that was really hard. Like, I'm not a presentation kind of guy. And it's hard to not compare yourself to these really analytical thinkers and people who are really good at compartmentalizing different aspects of photography and segregating them and having them into, putting them into different concepts. I'm just like, this is what I do. So it took me a really long time to put my presentation together, and I kind of explained it to my girlfriend. I was almost like building a rock wall.
Okay.
And I had to find, like, somebody takes me out into this field that I'm familiar with. I've been in this field many times, but there are all these rocks buried in the field, and I have to go through this field and find these rocks, which are my thoughts, right? And I have to gather them all and put them in a pile, and then separate them into different piles, different sizes, so that I can start putting them together in a way that builds like this wall. And that was really, really challenging. And I'm doing that right now with, just kind of putting it, that presentation more into an ebook format. It's like, how do I take all these ideas and make them seem very straightforward?
Right.
And so, yeah, it's very hard to articulate that innate emotional side of things that's just like kind of intuitive, So that's what I'm finding struggles with, but I feel like that is what I need to be teaching, because the other side of things just doesn't resonate with me, and that's not what I want to be teaching. I want people, I know what photography has done for me. Like, it's saved my life. I've learned things about myself through photography that I never would have otherwise. And to be able to even play a small part in helping somebody else find that, like, that is why I do it. The money is nice, I mean, well, it could be better. But it's nice. What I mean is, it's nice to be able to make some sort of living doing that. But where I find the real joy and what the real payoff is having a client being like, you know what, like you have taught me, you've changed the way that I view the landscape, or the way that I interact with it, or the way that I feel about my photography, and like that's what gives me the goosebumps and what really like pads my wallet.
Well, I think, what I would say to you is, because I mean, I think one of my skills is my ability to articulate quite complex emotional processes in reasonably simple language. I think that's really where my skill lies. And I didn't know I had that skill really until I just started writing from the heart, instead of trying to over rationalize and um, over articulated. I think if you speak from your heart, and the thing that I'd love to say to you right now is that your work and your heart and your words are all part of the same system. They're clearly, I was speaking to William Neal last week, and his work is the same. His images and his life and the place that he spends his time are all part of the same system, and they're telling us things about the place and you and nature and your emotional relationship with it. So I think you're doing a very good job of articulating your passion, and it's the power of nature to heal. And I think all I would really suggest is that don't try and kill that by overthinking how to make it sound prettier. I think a nice simple passion is all that's required. And I think really where your strength truly lies, I think, is your ability to dive deep into the landscape in that really emotional level, and then produce beautifully rendered interpretations of those experiences. So realistically, all you need to do is teach people how to do that. And I think the only way you can teach people how to do that is for them to experience living at that level. So I think you're already doing a pretty awesome job, man.
I appreciate that. It's been, yeah, I do a lot of thinking about my, a lot of introspection about my motives, and why I think certain things or don't think certain things or interact with certain ways. So I've been trying to be a little bit better about making those notes. I do have, my phone is just completely a mess with like almost like a journal of sorts, with, and then sometimes I don't know whether I should put it in my Google Documents document that I have for it, or my notes folder that I have for it. So I just have like all these little nuggets of thoughts and emotions spread all over the place. But I'm trying to organize them a little bit better, because those are those rocks for that wall, that wall that I'm talking about, and if I can, look through them and see different trends or themes, then that's maybe something that I can kind of put together that might help somebody. So I think just the way that I'm trying to improve upon that is just being a little bit more, just making notes about it, so that, in an example is, like, I might have a thought 2 years ago that I have that's very at the forefront of my mind, but then it kind of goes back into my subconscious and kind of percolates a little bit. And then when I go back and review my notes, I'll see that note again. I'll be like, I was onto something there, and I've developed that in the meantime, and now it's back in my consciousness, and I can work on that in a conscious way, whether it's an idea about a photo, or the way that I interact with landscape, or anything, So I think doing that is a big secret for me, in being able to know what is in here, and continue to hopefully help people and continue to make a career out of this.
Well, I find talking to you utterly fascinating, and I could do so for hours and hours and hours. But what I'm really starting to think of in my mind is that we need to get together at some point, because Anne Kristin and I are planning to be over in the States next year at some point, and I can just picture you and I doing a kind of Minor White style little secluded workshop somewhere where we can take some folks into the woods and go somewhere so anonymous and just so if you'd be up for that, I'd be absolutely thrilled to do it.
Yeah, I would be. Yeah, I've tried. We've done one so far of like a slow photography focused workshop with my friend Eric, where we go into a forest and we camp there with the workshop on location for 5 days. There's no cell service. There's a pit toilet, a fire ring, and a picnic table, and that's it. So you're drinking, if you bring your filter, you're drinking water from a glacial river, and you're just in the landscape for 5 days, like kind of just detaching from the world and trying to find that place in your heart where you're not looking, where you're being spoken to and you're listening, and the landscape is basically telling you what to engage with and what to photograph instead of going out and trying to find a photo, which is what a lot of workshops are, right? Like, okay, it's photo time, let's go to this location and try to find these things. And I get it, because a lot of people aren't as fortunate as you and I, where we can spend days and days and days just kind of doing whatever. Like, I can go to Olympic National Park and be there for 4 days and not pull my camera out, and I know that's a luxury.
Yeah.
So I understand both sides of it, but I'm trying to provide that opportunity to kind of live as I do, to create the images that I feel like I do in only the way that I can, which is doing what I just said. So, but yeah, I want to do more of that in different places.
Yeah, absolutely. That's we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, that for me, making photographs that somehow manage to capture that deep engagement and fascination with the landscape is kind of what I've been working on for the last maybe 4 or 5 years. And I just get such a buzz out of talking to people like yourself, who are doing the same thing, because suddenly you don't feel quite so alone. But at the same time, there's been some really curious things that you've come up with during this conversation. And one of them is this sort of conscious, I'm aware now that we're kind of starting to ramble on in terms of time, but okay, it's my show.
I can go all day.
So basically what I was going to get back to was, you've got this kind of conscious distillation going on where you're sort of thinking, too many diagonals or too many centered compositions and stuff. And I'm just wondering how important that really is, in that whether there's too much consciousness still in the field, which is somehow a barrier to experiencing alternatives, because that's what it is if you're consciously, it's this battle between the conscious and the unconscious, is how conscious are you in the field of presenting the world in that kind of format, versus are you still blinkered to other alternatives, because you have too much consciousness.
Right. I know the photographs that I am the happiest with and the compositions that I'm the happiest with are the ones that I thought about the least. So I know that there is something to be said for that, but that doesn't take away. I think it's good to kind of be, aware and critical of your work in some ways, and at least have a desire, because I think a lot of things start with a desire or a thought or a consciousness behind it.
Sure.
But being able to have that in your heart and mind and not think about it and apply that is, the crux of that improvement. So, like I said, knowing that is something in my work that I want to change or improve or just explore beyond, is an important thought for me to have. And now I have to kind of let that filter from my head all the way down through to my heart and carry that with me. I'm interacting with the landscape. When it comes down to it and I'm interacting with the landscape, like, I don't think about that. Granted, there are times like, when Alex and I do a workshop, we take people to this canyon in Death Valley, and it's full of diagonal lines. And that is one place where I'm just like, everything's diagonal. I'm not going to shoot that because it's diagonal. I'm not going to shoot this because it's diagonal. And like, I kind of get in that zone. but then I'm also there on a workshop. So it's like, I'm not in that zone to begin with where like I'm creating images from here, I'm worrying about the clients and making sure that they're getting the shots that they like. But, I even tell them, I'm like, don't get in the habit, try to look beyond the diagonal lines and try to find different ways to compose them, by using Dutch angles or whatever have you, just to change up the literal representation of what you are seeing with your eyes. Because yes, it might be a diagonal line, but if you turn your camera in a different way, they're vertical lines or horizontal lines, or this curve, and instead of going in a diagonal, it can be, so it's a very dynamic landscape. But that is one, it hasn't made its way there yet, where I can just go into a place and interact with that in a deeper way, I guess.
I've got one final question, which is, do you think your development as a person has more influence on the development of your creativity, or the opposite? Do you think the development of your creativity has more influence on you and your personal development? So which one's, who's driving, basically?
Chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
I think the creativity's driving. When I look at my work, or I think about the way that I interact with landscape, that's what leads me to realizations about myself. So, an understanding of motivations and tendencies and things like that. It's, when I look through my portfolio, I will see themes in my work. And a perfect example is, and I talk about this a lot because it's very important to me, but water. I have an obsession with photographing water. Like, I have thousands and thousands of photos, and I keep alluding to a book that I want to work on. I even mentioned that to you. But this project is so overwhelming because I have thousands of photos that I would have to sift through to find the ones that I would want to include. And they're all really important to me because I just connect with water in such a deep way. And I don't know why, and maybe I shouldn't know why, but I'm using photography to explore that. Okay. And I didn't realize that was a thing in a conscious way until maybe a couple of years ago. So I started actively exploring that. But when I look back at my work from 2012, 13, 14, I see hints of it. So, the creativity in photography and exploring, thinking about my work and what my motivations are, like, that is what leads me to realizations about the way that I interact with landscape that enable me to do it in a more conscious way, where maybe I'll get some answers, or maybe it'll just deepen my relationship with that. So I think the creativity is what drives my personal development, for sure.
Right. So last question 2.0 then, which is, this is the last, because I asked that one as a lead up to this one, which is then, if the creativity is driving your personal development, is the creativity coming from a place of the subconscious or the conscious?
Subconscious.
Right.
When, like I said, when I'm in it, it's like, and going back to the water thing, like, I can photograph a specific wave in a river for an hour and not even realize that an hour has passed, and be completely unaware as to what's going on around me. And my girlfriend has commented on, she's like, you're still photographing? Like, she'll go off and photograph something else, come back, she's like, you're still photographing that? It's been like 45 minutes, but no. But it's like, it's spending time with one moment and just like learning its behavior and what it's doing and the details. And if it's a way a leaf is fluttering on a tree, like the motion of that leaf, or the rhythm that water has, like, I'm not thinking about a photo, I'm not thinking about whatever. It's just like, I'm like, wow, this is a pretty cool moment to be spending time with, and I find gratitude in that. So I think a lot about if I can distill my inspiration down into one word, it would be gratitude. Right. Because that's something that I need to have in order to stay alive. And no matter how dark the clouds overhead are, I need to be grateful that there is light on the other side, and know that I have to wait that out, or whatever have you. But it's gratitude, and it's a positive outlook no matter what, that what keeps me going and what keeps me interacting with the landscape in the way that I do.
There's a huge resonance with everything you're saying, man. It's as you said, we could do this for a long, long time, I suspect, but I think we're going to have to draw it to a close to make it palatable for a YouTube video. But I have a strong feeling we're going to be doing this again. And the reason I had to ask that last question was that the answer was very important, because it really determined if we were still going to be friends or not.
Well, I hope I passed the test, but
yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that was a real deal breaker for me.
Well, like I said, like there's, I kind of view life as, kind of like waves, like we're all riding waves, and some people's waves are really big and dramatic, and some people's are kind of like this. And, I feel like we kind of, we go along the same wavelength, and you can kind of see that when you are, crossing paths with people, you can kind of get a feeling for what wave they're riding.
Right.
And I get that from you and a lot of other people. And that doesn't mean that, I can't cross paths with those people at the big waves. I certainly have friends and people that are important to me that, function on a different wavelength, but
totally, yeah.
It's there's a level of connection that you get immediately from people that are on that same wavelength that just can't be explained or planned, I guess.
I'd like to just make a very quick shout out to a mutual friend of ours, Rena, who will be thrilled that this conversation is taking place, because I think she was kind of instrumental in sort of putting us together. Yes. So hi, Rena. It was a very good suggestion. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Rena. Hope to see you again.
Yes, I'm sure we will. TJ, it's been a real pleasure. I just can't thank you enough for coming on and being so honest and open. It's just a joy to talk to you, and your work is a joy to watch. So make sure you just keep it coming and stay on that righteous path.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words and the opportunity, and I look forward to the future.
Yeah, anytime, man.